Chapter 129, Antony's POV. Antony had lived a long life. He had visited many places with languages and customs that were strange to him. And at the moment, he couldn't remember anything that had confused him as much as this horrible conversation. One minute, Hanyu was lying prostrate on the floor, pouring out his gratitude for Antony's promise not to kiss him again. And yes, he had been expecting that particular gut punch, but foreknowledge didn't do much to lessen the impact. The next moment, he was smiling and proclaiming that he wanted another kiss, please. He sure didn't seem like he wanted a kiss. His smile looked less open than usual, and his whole body was shaking. Was it the aftermath of his tears? Was it the strain of pretending he wanted another of Antony's clumsy, repulsive kisses? Or the strain of pretending he didn't? No, he doesn't want me anymore. I'm lucky enough that he still wants to live with me. At least, I think he does. That alone is far better than I deserve. It was so wrong, but Antony couldn't help wishing in a greasy, selfish corner of his mind that he had reciprocated Hanyu's feelings back when they were still there. What would it have been like to kiss his precious man when he still wanted it? He could have kissed him the night they looked at the stars together, or the time Hanyu clung to him in their bed after Antony roused him from his nightmare, or when Antony was teaching Hanyu to dance and caught him as he fell. It was all too easy to imagine Hanyu's delight, his clumsy, affectionate movements and happy chatter, and the way he would have squirmed, surrendering himself eagerly to any pleasure Antony managed to give him. Antony had clearly missed his chance. Even more clearly, that was a good thing, no matter how teary and remorseful he might feel about it now. How much worse would this rejection, or at least seeming rejection, have stung if there had been something like that between them? How hurt and violated would Hanyu have felt? It was better this way, no matter how much Antony had to talk himself into remembering that. Either way, neither of them was in kissing shape at the moment. It was as good of an excuse as any to change the damn subject already. All right. Antony tried to make his voice gentle instead of snapping at the shaking man, though he wasn't sure how well he succeeded. Could you do something for me? Hanyu visibly steeled himself. Yes, my lord, anything. Don't flinch. Don't let him see that his fear is upsetting you. It'll just make everything worse. I need to wash up, Antony said levelly. Could you please get me a basin of water and a rag, please? The young man perked up. Oh, yes, just a minute. Antony felt a little better when he'd scrubbed himself, or at least as much of himself as he could reach, with the stinging salt water. He was contemplating undoing his bandages and cleaning up the skin underneath when a knock at the door sent Hanyu scrambling into the next room. A moment later, Julia entered. Antony was glad that he hadn't tampered with her bandages after all. She looked stressed, and he didn't think she'd have taken the affront very well. Is Asao all right? Hanyu blurted, clearly reading her strained expression just as Antony did. Julia stiffened, looking trapped for a moment before replying calmly, He's healing well. She's hiding something. All at once, Antony was sick of it. He knew it was hypocritical of him. He spun courtly effusions every time he opened his mouth, sometimes without even realizing it. But Julia and Hanyu weren't speaking plainly with him, even though the situations were vitally important, and he was just done with trying to operate in circumstances that he didn't understand. He couldn't make Hanyu tell the truth about his feelings. He couldn't make his own useless mind come up with a perfect plan for dealing with Titus and Marcus. But he could damn well get a look at Asao and find out what his healer didn't want him to see. Good. His tone came out with more steel than he would have expected in his current pathetic state. Then this would be the perfect time for us to pay him a visit. He heard Hanyu's pleased gasp, but he kept his eyes fixed on Julia. She looked much less enthusiastic about his plan, her lips tightening and eyes widening just a little bit. Antony had been right. She was definitely hiding something. You're not well enough. He had to hand it to her. Her court tones were just as calm and unreadable as his own. The stairs will be much too painful. Oh, I'll be all right, Antony assured her. Anyhow, didn't you say the poor fellow was afraid that he would be in trouble for stabbing one of us? I hate to leave him in suspense. Don't you agree that it would be best to settle his mind as soon as possible? Please, my lord, it would mean so much to him. Hanyu clasped his hands, looking excitedly between Antony and Julia. He must be so nervous. See? Hanyu allowed a bit of challenge into his voice. My caretaker agrees. Why don't we go right now? Surely it will be easier to see to my bandages in the infirmary. Julia's shoulders slumped. Antony stiffened, surprised to have won. Fine, the healer grated out. Let's go. Antony leaned heavily on her strong shoulder as they walked, and she was right. The pain as each step jostled his healing bones was excruciating. However, it felt good to be on his feet again. He was sick of being carried around like a baby. He wasn't the only one who seemed grateful to get out of those rooms. Some of Hanyu's usual spirits seemed to be restored as they headed off to visit his friend. He trailed the requisite steps behind Antony and Julia, but his gait seemed lighter and easier than it had been in their rooms. Maybe it was just wishful thinking on Antony's part, but he couldn't help thinking that the man felt a little better. He must be awfully excited to see Asao again. Speaking of which... Antony leaned closer to Julia's ear and whispered to her in their own language. Whatever's going on with your patient, is it something he shouldn't see? He was careful to avoid using any names. Hanyu was sure to worry if he heard his or Asao's name among the foreign words. No, it's nothing like that, Julia replied, exasperated. He's fine, I told you that. And you're obviously hiding something, Antony shot back. Of course I got worried. Julia sighed. All right, yes. I wish you hadn't pushed it today, but you would have found out sooner or later. Just try to keep calm, all right? Well, there was a sentence to drive every last scrap of calm from a person's body. Why? What's wrong? Before Julia could answer, they arrived. Hanyu scrambled forward to heave open the infirmary door, and Antony and the healer stumbled through together. My lords! Asao's voice sounded more tense and tremulous than ever, but Antony couldn't quite focus on the young man until he was seated and the pain spots had begun clearing from his eyes. Oh, hello, everyone, Thaddeus greeted from somewhere else in the room. Antony, Hanyu, it's good to... Asao! Hanyu cried, galloping over to his friend's side. You look... Gods! You look good! When Antony's eyes cleared, he saw that Hanyu was right. He hadn't had an especially good look at Asao before leaving the infirmary, preoccupied as he had been with his own situation, but even he could tell that the man's improvement was remarkable. Almost too remarkable. Asao was sitting in a chair, no longer confined to his bed. He was bent over his lap in as much of a bow as he could manage, and he held the pose steadily. His hair was pulled back into a neat bun, which left his face bare but for the patch over his blinded eye, and made it obvious that his wounds were scarring at an astonishing rate. They snaked over the man's face, still stitched with Julia's neat craftsmanship, but they were already completely stabbed over. They looked as if they'd been healing for a week, not a few days, and even Asao's complexion wasn't as pale as Antony would have expected from a man recovering from severe blood loss. In fact, Antony was more aware of Asao's blood than he would usually have been at such a distance from the man. He could almost smell it, an intoxicating edge on the air of the infirmary, and there was certainly no sign that Asao had recently lost a good deal of it. It wasn't as rapid as Antony's own healing had been, not even close, but from his own recollections and factoring in Hanyu's open-mouthed astonishment, it was far quicker than normal for a human. Julia. Antony should have either greeted Asao or turned from him to look at the healer, but he couldn't tear his eyes from his attendant's miraculously well-healed face. What's going on? She huffed and began pacing. Listen, I didn't tell Theo or Felix or Cloelia either, all right? You're all the first to know. I never meant to leave you in the dark, especially not you, Asau. Asau doesn't know either? The man's round, nervous eyes and trembling hands seemed to confirm as much. Hanyu let out a little whimper of tension. I just wasn't sure how to... Julia's voice trailed off. When she spoke again, her voice was sharp and matter-of-fact, inviting no comment from any of them. Asau, you had lost too much blood. Marcus had nicked a vein in your thigh while he was decorating you. You'd been steadily losing blood from that injury for almost an hour. It was too much. I was going to lose you. Antony was a little startled by the raw anguish in her voice. Since when did Julia care so intensely about his newest attendant? Yes, she seemed to grow fond of him as she treated his injuries, but... A shuddering sob drew Antony's eyes to Hanyu. The man was deathly pale as he fell to his knees next to Asau's chair, clasping his friend's hand to his chest. Asau sat like a statue, eyes fixed on Julia's face, his own expression unreadable. Thad had a hand pressed over his mouth, stifling whatever sounds he might have been about to make. Julia ignored them all. If I had had any other choices, I wouldn't have risked it, but there were no other options, she continued, her tone steely and professional again. I conducted a transfusion. I gave you some of my blood. It was Antony's turn to gasp. That had been a relatively simple procedure back home, where there had been spells to test whether the donor's blood would be compatible with the recipient. But out here, with no magic? It was dangerous, Julia admitted, but I didn't have any choice. You would have died, Asau. Oh, Julia, Thad murmured. But that's good, Hanyu cried, voice thick with the tears that streaked his face. Thank you, my lord. He's healing so well. It was wonderful of you to bless him with God's blood, and now he'll be up and around in no time. Asau was still just sitting there, looking more frozen every moment. My lord, your servant is not worthy of such generosity, he finally managed. This honor... Thana, Antony croaked. He hadn't meant to speak aloud, but the delicious scent of Asau's blood and the grim look on Julia's face had connected the puzzle pieces for him. Not just Sana, Julia replied, her face crumpling unhappily. She said her former apprentice's name with a tender tone, even after all this time. Of course you're not the only one who's tried, Antony. You know that. Suppose he had known, in a vague way. There had been whispers every now and then of an attempted turning, an attempt that always went wrong. He'd never really dared to let himself believe in them. It felt too much like making excuses for himself and his own weakness. What do you mean? Hanyu demanded. Asau looked confused as well, but he flinched at his friend's loud questions. Hanyu, please, our lords don't owe us any... Of course I owe you an explanation. Julia moved across the room in a few swift strides and knelt in front of Asau's chair, forcing Hanyu to scoot further to the side. Oh, Thad whispered, apparently reaching the same conclusion that had left Antony dumbfounded, trapped motionless in an old misery. Asau looked terribly uncomfortable as the healer knelt before him, but she reached up and clasped the hand Hanyu had left, her gaze fixed on the attendant's one remaining eye. Asau, when your blood is contaminated by ours, it becomes addictive, she explains. Any one of us who begins drinking it won't be able to stop. I'm afraid no one will be able to feed from you anymore. Yes, my lord. The man darted a frightened glance at Antony, then looked back at Julia. If your servant may ask, for how long? Julia shook her head, hunching her shoulders as though she were preparing for a blow. I'm sorry, Asau. Forever. Asau's blood may have been changed, but it looked the same as ever when it all drained from his face.